Welcome back to Flashback Files, where once again, our purpose is to help students, recent grads, and young professionals reflect on how early experiences shape confidence, identity, and leadership. Today, we have Eesha. She is a psychology, neuroscience, behavior student at McMaster. Eesha has 16 plus years of dance training and teaching, 9 plus years of Toastmasters involvement and leadership as a student leader at McMaster. She's also has volunteer experience, still on her journey at school. So she's early in her path, not far removed from the transition many of our listeners could be making right now, making her story both relatable and grounding. So Eesha, if you wouldn't mind, can you tell listeners a little bit about you, such as what your upbringing was like, how maybe school, career may have been emphasized in your family, and certainly what interests you might have outside of school?
So thank you so much for that introduction, firstly. I'm so incredibly grateful to be here. In terms of my upbringing specifically, or my childhood, I can say I can't take much credit for being in dance because that was something my mom enrolled me in when I was around 4 years old. So you yourself don't understand very much then. It was more so just an opportunity that I think my mom saw that I enjoyed dancing and she thought, let's enroll her in something. And the rest is history because lo and behold, it's now been 16 years and I've continued it. But that first credit very much so goes to my mom. And for Toastmasters as well, I would say so much of my upbringing and who I am today would credit entirely to my parents and my family. They're a huge part of why I am the person that I am today. And like you rightfully mentioned, Toastmasters and dance is a very big part of that. But because I was so young when those things were introduced into my life, albeit I'm still very young and I'm aware of that, but I was extra young. Those were definitely things that I think fate or my parents brought into my life a little bit. But yeah, I have a younger sister, two wonderful parents. My grandparents have lived with us here and there, so always a very full house and a joyous house.
Excellent. And what do you have any other interests outside of school that you partake in?
I enjoy reading a lot, anything with literature, words, languages. I write poetry here and there. I do have a poetry collection published, although admittedly, I do forget about that sometimes. I have to have people remind me. But yeah, that was exciting. That was more so like a COVID project of mine, a quarantine project. But yeah, anything about words really, be those reading them in different languages or just writing them myself.
Cool. So with the dance, how do you, first off, what disciplines did you do with dance?
So there's a North Indian classical style of dance called Kathak. Within classical Indian classical dance, there are, I believe, 8 specific styles, of which Kathak is just one of them.
Okay. And how has dance shaped your sense of discipline and maybe identity growing up?
Oh my gosh, I feel as though I could speak forever on this, simply because there's so much to be extracted from my classical training in dance. Because it is a classical art form, there is a different degree of, actually no, I think commitment is required for any pursuit of life in order to, excel at it and have mastery. But a byproduct of having committed to something for 16 years is being able to see that commitment in myself. In terms of how it shaped my sense of discipline, I started off learning 1 hour every week. And that is something that's something that I've had consistent throughout my life since I was 4 years old. And it's funny, I don't know how familiar you or perhaps someone might be with this phrase, but I heard it recently and I think it's gotten a little bit more famous where people often overestimate how much they can do in a year and underestimate how much they can do in 10 years. And again, I know I'm so young, but I think about that phrase in the context of my dance journey. And because I've been doing it for 16 years, I find that that really holds true, where it was just 1 hour a week, but 1 hour a week for 16 years. And here I am now about to get a bachelor's degree in dance. And so it instills in you a faith in the principle of commitment, which sounds silly because in textbook, what is there to not believe about commitment, and what is there to, logically or theoretically, everything makes sense. But being able to see it in practice, especially see it in your own life, is a completely different sense of fulfillment. So that would be my first answer to how dance has perhaps shaped my understanding of commitment. And in terms of my identity, well, I am culturally or ethnically South Asian, and Indian specifically. So learning from such a young age a dance that is so deeply rooted in my heritage just taught me everything not everything, but just taught me so much more, gave me another opportunity to learn about it, be it through the characters that we display. So much of Indian classical dance is storytelling. The stories that we tell are naturally related to our heritage and the messages that are passed down through those. So it really was such an integral way of me becoming more comfortable with my identity, especially of learning it. The language itself is different. The language is oftentimes Hindi or Sanskrit. Sanskrit is an ancient Indian language. So many different ways in which that I could say it. The language itself, be those the compositions that we have to say. A lot of the compositions that we dance to, we also have to be able to recite and say on tempo.
Mhm.
And those words themselves are very difficult to say because they require different pronunciations than perhaps our Canadian English would. There is rolling of the tongue. They come from a deeper place in your throat a little bit. So there's different. Um, it it really works your tongue as a muscle, and I believe that any any practice done in regards to these things is always like it. It never constrains you, right? It only expands. So it expands my ability to speak my own language at home because though there's similarities between the pronunciations there. Um, so yeah, that I would say that that's how dance has shaped me in terms of my belief on discipline and then also my identity as a whole because it's given me both of those things and an opportunity to practice both of those things.
It's amazing. I hear the passion come through your voice when you talk about it. And what I'm also hearing is the discipline that it takes to commit to even just a 1 hour a week over 16 years. That's more consistency than anything. It's just showing up and making sure you're part of it. I'm sure there were maybe days that you didn't feel like showing up. Maybe you weren't
Always.
feeling all that great, but yeah, discipline and commitment to it. That's very admirable. I would love to be able to stick to something for more than 2 months.
I get it. And I just want to add one more point that, you know, even my commitment right now doesn't feel like much at all because then you look at some of the top dancers in the world, and these are people that are committing maybe 3 hours a day every day and have been for the past 10 years. So even though I am so grateful and I feel so lucky and honored to be in a position where I'm familiar enough with Kathak to call myself a dancer, that commitment definitely does not par to some of the best dancers in the world and what they're giving.
Amazing. So this next portion of our discussion, I really want to focus a little bit on Toastmasters and how maybe it helped with your communication and your confidence. So if you can maybe just give listeners an overview of what Toastmasters is, and then maybe dive into how at 11 years of age you put your hand up to join an organization like Toastmasters.
Absolutely. I am the biggest Toastmasters advocate. I believe so much in their mission and what they try to accomplish and the way that they show up for the community. So Toastmasters is originally an adults organization where many adults in different sort of parts of the world can come together within their own communities and practice public speaking. The aim of the organization is really to promote that, to promote, I would say at its heart, just communication. Because Toastmasters evolves in terms of its curriculum, they practice giving public speeches just as a baseline, but then they cater those speeches towards different events. So you can also practice giving interviews. There's a whole manual on perhaps how to give presentations in professional settings. There's a whole manual on how to give humorous speeches. There's a whole manual on storytelling. So there's in this world, there are multiple instances in which individuals are required to communicate and communicate in different ways. And Toastmasters tries to acknowledge that and say, hey, this is a reality that all of us have to communicate in different settings, and we should be able to communicate to the best of our ability. So why don't we bring people together to try practicing it consciously or intentionally? And again, I don't necessarily want to be the spokesperson of Toastmasters here, but from my experience, that is what Toastmasters as an organization represented to me. In terms of my involvement in it, so in order to but because Toastmasters started off as primarily adult thing, there were many individuals who thought, hey, this could be also really helpful to bring towards the youth. So I was in what's called a youth gavel club. I joined at the age of 11 when I was in grade 6, which I believe is a standard time to join. Some people might join as guests, maybe a little bit earlier, around grade 4, but they typically, know someone older in the club and they're curious about what's going on. And it goes from the ages of around 10 to 18, because at 18 you officially become an adult and you're allowed to join the older Toastmasters clubs. And so again, when it came to me originally joining, so much of that was my parents. They heard about it through someone else, I believe, and through word of mouth, I was fortunate enough for it to reach my family. They thought it would be a great learning opportunity, and they enrolled me when I think I attended as a guest for one of their meetings, and I remember just being in awe. I remember thinking, wow, there are so many eloquent speakers here, and they're really only 3 to 4 years older than me, but they seem to have such substance and such a sense of perhaps not purposes and like purpose of what you would do in the world, but in this moment I am here and I'm speaking and there's a purpose to that, and they seem to be aware of that and they know how to work with it. And that to me was the most captivating aspect. That's what drew me towards Toastmasters. And so then the next year in grade 6 I joined, and that's sort of how I initially got involved with it. I can speak a little bit more about what I learned, what it represents to me, but that's the story of how I first got into Toastmasters.
Can I ask you one question? So when you attended, were you just on your own? Did you need a friend to go with you, or were you completely just solo in your uncomfort zone?
So I didn't necessarily know anyone beforehand, but a friend and I did join together. And it definitely helped me in terms of during the breaks, you would have someone to talk to. But as a whole, Toastmasters as a community, or the club that I was specifically a part of as an environment, is very much so designed with every minute, every hour being used very intentionally. So the 10-minute break we would get was really the only free socialization time. Everything else was things like table topics, impromptu speaking, or preparing for a debate. We would do debates every week. That's where I learned the first structure of how a debate works, be it an introduction, putting your case forward, a rebuttal. I didn't know what a rebuttal was before I joined Toastmasters, and then we would do evaluations, and evaluations were a big component as well, because not only is it important to the person receiving them, but the person giving them also learns how to critique. So my point that I'm trying to communicate here is just that Toastmasters, our meetings were very structured. So I don't ever remember feeling too nervous about it, socially speaking, because that's the free socialization period was really only 10 minutes. And in that you're hungry, you're eating a little bit, you're drinking water, you're speaking to your seniors, and then you're in whatever time you have mingling with other people as well.
That's amazing. I again, I told you before we jumped on that Toastmasters at your age, excuse me, is so impressive. But we know, we've heard it many times, that people have this fear of public speaking, and for you to work that muscle so young, I can only imagine what your university presentations look like. Do you find that you're showing up in a big way when it comes to high school, when it came to high school and university presentations?
I believe there were two things that happened in line. And yeah, I was very lucky that these two happened at the same time. The first is that grade 6 was not only my first year of Toastmasters, where I was getting comfortable with the idea of being on a stage. and being in front of a bunch of people. But in grade 6, my teacher was also in school, someone who focused very deeply on critiquing everyone's presentation skills and evaluating them. And so it felt like I had two things going exactly at the same time, teaching me different, not, they were the same skills, but in different contexts. And that can only ever fortify one another, right? So it really worked in my favor well. To answer directly your question, I do find that it has benefited me in high school and university. I find that I'm able to work well with content and delivery. Like I'm familiar enough with what each of them require and how to navigate them. So for example, when I'm looking at content, I know how to, depending on my audience, how I need to cater what I'm saying. I've learned how to add a story in here and there, or add a joke at the start, or I know how to start something off with an introduction such that it'll engage the audience. When it comes to delivery, I know if I'm on a physical stage, how to walk around such that I'm making use of the stage space, or my body language, how to be intentional with my hands and my actions. And these aren't things that I could ever claim came naturally to me. These are, every single point I've mentioned is a point I've had critiqued in Toastmasters far too many times, such
Yeah.
that it is completely ingrained in my head. So yeah, I would say that those have definitely helped me just feel comfortable with the idea of speaking. And I'm going to slightly go on a little bit of a tangent here. Just bear with me, please.
Yeah.
But I would say the biggest thing that I really learned in Toastmasters is this idea of fortifying your relationship to the stage. And that sounds really abstract, but I can make it a little bit more tangible. What I mean is, a lot of people, when they step on a stage, they find that they get nervous because they look at the people and they lose sight of what it is that they have to say. Um, the one thing Toastmasters teaches you is when you step on a stage, it's never about the stage. It's always about what it is that you have to say. This goes back to what I was saying about how when I first went to that meeting as a guest, I saw people who held so much purpose when they were on the stage. They knew what they were there for. They knew what they were trying to say. It's the same sort of message you carry throughout any instance in where you have to communicate, be it an in-person conversation with someone, be it a presentation, be it a speech behind a podium. Any time, any moment in which you are asked to speak, when you are saying something, there's purpose behind it. And when there's a purpose behind something and you remember that, then your relationship with the stage and with you as yourself as a communicator changes drastically, because you dissolve. You dissolve into the background a little bit. You're mostly just thinking about, this is my message here. There's an audience here in front of me, and I have to be the bridge between the two.
Hmm.
And so that, I think, is the biggest takeaway, and a great way to encapsulate the mission of Toastmasters is really giving you tangible techniques in order to make that bridge as strong as possible.
That's an excellent description. I envisioned it myself, and I learned something. I've done a little bit of presenting in my day, but I'd never heard it put it that way. It's really well put. Any quick tips on reading an audience quickly? I would imagine you come on the stage and you almost have to do a split-second assessment of who you're speaking to and maybe how you might tailor your message. Or do you even go through that exercise?
I have two things to
Okay.
sort of go to. The first is, before you're about to go onto a stage, the person that you're organizing it with, being able to speak with them, or the person that's organizing the event or organize the opportunity for you, being able to connect with them, helps you gain an understanding of, once again, the opportunity. Once you understand what the opportunity is there for, it's a little bit safer to imagine that the audience members will be there for similar reasons. Especially in more professional settings, I think it's a safer bet to say that if multiple working professionals who, have their own routines and their own lives and are busy, have all found time to come together for this one collective event, then there's a shared sense of purpose and consensus. So when you can speak with the person that's organizing it to get a little bit more of a deeper understanding of the event, their objectives, I think that can help you feel a sense of ease. Also, you don't feel so alone on the stage then, because there's someone in the audience that understands you and your vision as it is, and you're working with them in tandem in a way. So you're not alone in your purpose. But then when it comes to connecting with the actual audience, my biggest thing is just to laugh, just to smile. I don't like who doesn't like seeing someone smiling. Um, certain certain occasions might not allow you for you to do so if it's you know something that a topic that requires a little bit more sensitivity or gravity. Perhaps you might not be able to start with that, but that's very context specific. I would say perhaps 80% of the time, if you go up on stage and the first thing you do is smile, most of the audience will be disarmed. You yourself will be disarmed, and it'll create a good enough starting point, at least for you.
Cool. Great. Two great tips. Okay, so I told you I would go into Toastmasters a bit, and I'm glad we did. I think it's super relevant for, again, the people we're trying to reach with university grads, those just getting into their careers, potentially presenting at their companies for the first time. So thanks for the insights. Let's have a look at the leadership roles you've taken on. So from my understanding, you have or had a VP membership role at McMaster. Am I correct there?
I was yes, I was I was VP of cultural of a cultural club here, and then I did different roles in that club. The first role I had was um VP of arts, which is basically someone responsible for bringing the artistic and the choreography, the artistic vision and the choreographic vision to life. And then VP cultural is someone who's responsible for uh, being a liaison between the actual club and what they stand for, and manifesting those and bringing it to life for the other students at the club that are trying to engage and interact with that.
Okay, so quite a bit of a leadership role. Is that an innate thing that you had in you, where you may have done that throughout school, before university, or when you were younger? Like, where did the desire to step up in a role like that come from?
It's it's hard for me to answer that from a perspective of me, because when I think of my life, I think of it in two facets. One is just that I've always been passionate about different things, and I've always been interested and curious about different things. But then I've also always had the luck and the opportunity that's brought me to be able to do something about it. So I don't know how much of that credit I can take for entirely, but I think I had parents who instilled a lot of curiosity in me about my heritage, my culture, the world, um, just like the scientific workings of this world, be that through the engineering marvels, architectural marvels, geology, math, the way that you're able to operationalize certain things in this world and make patterns and equations out of them. So there's always been a huge, huge, huge degree of curiosity in me. And throughout my life, I've either had the right teachers who saw that in me and uplifted me into leadership positions, or my parents encouraging me. So a lot of different older mentors around me who sort of held me up, I think, and gave me the confidence and maybe just the opportunity, really, even before the confidence came, to show myself as a leader in that sense.
Excellent. So we're just scratching the surface now with school. I'm going to just ask a couple questions around your program selection. So again, you are in psychology, neuroscience, and behavior. What drew you to that path like, rewind back to when you were grade 12, or maybe you had the desire to go down this path even earlier. But when did you make the choice that you were going to commit to this program, and how did you come up with that decision?
So I have a really funny story about this program, actually. And it's that, so in grade 12, my first choice was a different program at this university. It was a program called Health Sciences. And it's the same program that's the first choice of, everyone in university. So you do your thing, you do your part, you apply. Come the day of, I realized that I hadn't gotten selected in that program, but instead I had gotten selected in the kinesiology program and the life sciences program. I'm someone who at my core loves anatomy. So I remember thinking, you know what, I'm going to go into kinesiology. And then the day before the selections were due, at which point I had finalized and settled into kinesiology, I'm speaking with a senior at McMaster, and she says, Eesha, knowing what I do about the school and the community and just your interests, I feel as though life sciences would be a better first year program for you because from there you can specialize into psychology, neuroscience, and behavior. And although I don't want to speak on your behalf, I feel as though it's a better fit for you. And when I heard that, I think it was just again like a lucky timing sort of where I remember thinking, okay, I trust you, I believe you. And I went into life sciences then. And I realized throughout first year that my favorite course, or the content that I was learning, that was my favorite, was through the psych course. And so I thought, okay, well, it only naturally makes sense then for me to go into, we call it PNB, the psych neurobehavior. So it makes sense for me to go into PNB then. And then we had to do a second application sort of to specialize into specific programs. So this was, PNB had become my first specialization again. And when I got the acceptance into that, it wasn't until I saw the acceptance that I remembered something, which was when I was maybe 9 years oldish, just a little bit younger. I remember I would constantly think, how cool would it be if I could study how the mind influences the body and how the body influences the mind? But then I would have adults tell me in sort of a little bit of a condescending way, oh, so you want to be a shrink? Or something along the lines of, oh, but that's not feasible. If that's so abstract, that's so general. What does that even mean in terms of a degree? So when I was 9 years old, I heard those comments and I thought, yeah, it's unattainable. I'm not going to think about it. And then after this whole process was done, after I got the acceptance, I remember that memory came into my head and I remember thinking, I'm right where I'm meant to be. Because however many years ago, I don't remember, I'm not doing the math, but however many years ago, I had this thought for a couple of months that that's what I wanted to do. It always felt like something that would only ever happen in my wildest dreams. But lo and behold, my wildest dreams have come true. And I'm in a program that studies psychology, the mind, neuroscience, the body, and behavior, which is the interconnection of all of those two. So I feel like the most fortunate person ever.
Oh, that's so great. And the thing that I'm picking up on is maybe could be very useful for listeners is that skepticism from people that you love, potentially holding you back if you take their word for it, or, you maybe take it to heart. Did you, when you got acceptance, you were told at 9 that, the condescending question around being a shrink, but so when you got accepted, did you have to, or even during the application, did you have to sell anybody on your idea to apply, or was there a trust in you that you knew what you were doing?
I think there was a lack of knowledge that I took advantage of a little bit. And not in a malicious way, never in a malicious way. I was always transparent about what I was doing, what I was applying to. But I come from a background where both of my parents are engineers. Everyone in my family has either pursued either engineering or law. So there's not many people familiar with the specific healthcare field. And so, or banking, actually. Some of my family members are also within accounting. And so what that meant was the fact that I was doing a BSc in something pre-med related, no one really knew what the prerequisites or the understandings of that were. And if it ever came to a point where I was in front of family members who, I thought might perhaps not agree with the degree, I just shift the words around because I have so much love for everyone in my family, be that extended, be that, immediate. So all I say is I start with the neuroscience instead of the psychology, and that's good enough then because you prime them with, oh, this is a neuroscience, psychology and behavior, and then they think, oh, okay, cool, so it's one of those things where if you anticipate any trouble, and again, I'm lucky that I don't have expressively pushy family in that sense. But if I feel as though I just want to be cautious in advance, then I'll just switch the order
Right,
around a little bit, and that solves everything.
right. That's good advice.
Yeah, you're not lying, and you're a lot like you're able to still navigate that situation with just being just lightheartedness, right?
Yeah, yeah. What surprised you the most about the transition from high school to university?
Just how challenging it was, and it's funny because I can say that in hindsight, but when I was in there, when I was first year trying to go from high school to university, I never gave myself the space to admit that it was challenging, to say that, oh, I'm having a hard time right now. And now that, I'm a couple of years past that point and I look back, it's very easy for me to say, yeah, Eesha, you were struggling with the transition. You were struggling with the fact that there was no one there to hold you accountable to getting certain work done. And it was great. It was funny because the first month I would say was great. I had just read, I don't remember the author, but I believe the cover is red and the book is called How to Be a Straight A Student. Um, and if you search it up online, I'm sorry, I don't know who the author is, but I remember I read that the day before. I started and finished in one day, and I read it the day before university started. And I felt as though I had been so well equipped, and I knew all of the tips and tricks. But it's very different to know something theoretically and to be able to implement it in practice consistently and sustainably. And so for the first month, perhaps it worked perfectly, but then you start making friends. Your environment changes a little bit. You're studying together a little bit more. You're not so isolated. You're getting more involved. School starts picking up, but the clubs you're in also start picking up. Your commitments change. So things just become a little bit more multifaceted, really. And then I remember having a really hard time struggling with the transition. But again, that's not something I would have ever admitted to myself back then. It's only something I can say now. So sorry I didn't directly answer your question, but what the hardest part was about going from high school to university for myself, I think, was not having someone holding you accountable to your growth. Because as I said, I've been very lucky growing up that I had a lot of older adults around me who did. I had teachers who were very invested in my growth, be it, they saw that I was doing academically well, and so then they were invested in my growth as a leader. Or at home, I would go back home and my parents might not have seen me in leadership roles, but they were doing everything in their power to keep me academically strong and motivated, and then also just giving me different opportunities. Come to university, all of a sudden, you're legally an adult. All the professors have over 600 students to take care of. No one is specifically thinking about you, looking at you. And it takes a different degree than a intrinsic motivation. And not that I was never a motivated individual, but you realize how much of that motivation comes from external sources as opposed to then an intrinsic sort of drive. So I had to realize that as early as I could then.
I love that insight. And I think what I'll just do is double click on that in terms of, okay, you got to climatize, you learn that it's not external accountability. It's got to come from within. If you feel this way, when did you feel like I belong here? I am holding myself accountable. When did that light bulb click for you?
Maybe just earlier this year. It took a little bit, I'll admit. And I think I'm someone who is like nourished by continuous routine. Because if you think of it like a spiral almost, or like a helix sort of thing, you can either spiral this way up or you can spiral this way down. And when I find that I don't have a routine, then I go down the slide this way. But then if I have, and for anyone, if you're just listening, I'm pointing downwards. But if I have a good routine, then I'm able to sort of work my way up the staircase a little bit. And I think it was just in January, maybe earlier this year, where after a particularly low patch, rough semester, I realized that I had to put my big girl pants on and do something about it.
Mhm.
And that required me creating routines and systems. And that sounds all abstract, but really what I mean, I don't mean for that to just be a wishy-washy big statement. It really was just the small things. Like it was waking up every day to, maybe a song that was uplifting, that, made me want to get out of bed. It was getting myself in the shower, even though sometimes that's the last thing you want to do. Like, even if that means putting your clothes out the night before. It meant for me even if it meant for me having just one goal. At one point it really was just, Eesha, just get up, shower on time, and then you can go back to bed and that's okay. But just do one thing. Then the next week it was okay, now that you're getting like you've showered today, okay, just go to campus and don't think about the work you have to get done. Just make it to campus, make it out of your room, and you'll be fine. So it really was just about step by step, trying to find different ways to, like, what is the smallest current problem you can deal with so that next week you can deal with the next smallest current problem. That's sort of what it was for me.
Yeah, and I don't know if this happened for you, but I know in some instances when I do the small things, I like to it's almost a historical reference. Well, I did this last week successfully, so I should be able to do it this week. Does that come
Yeah,
up with you?
absolutely. And I think one of the things I learned is that sometimes it's not so much about, like, it's not so much you thinking you can't do it. Sometimes you know you can. All of us have, lived 20 however many years of our lives. Um, I'm assuming most of your listeners will be 20 plus though, so 20 plus years of our lives. And, we know that we can shower. We know that we have the ability to get out of bed. We know we have the ability to be out in the world. We know we have the ability to socialize. But sometimes there are hurdles and challenges that, like, there's a psychological inertia that you can't overcome sometimes. And I think for me, when I think about psychological inertia that I've experienced, I don't think it's been limited or exclusive to only one aspect of my life.
Hmm.
So the reason that I mentioned that is because if by that logic, if it's not exclusive to one aspect of your life, that means overcoming it in perhaps an easier aspect of your life will naturally bleed into the other things as well. So if it's impacting me in terms of my day, like morning routine, it's impacting me in my career and my school, and it's also impacting me in my friendship. Those are all big things. What is the easiest of these to overcome?
Right.
Maybe I don't have to worry about school right now because maybe that's too much of a hurdle. Maybe my morning routine is the easiest for me. So if I overcome my psychological inertia in the morning routine, then hopefully that will give me the momentum or the strength to bleed through into every other thing. I don't have to start with the hardest thing. You can start with the easiest one. It's the same thing that carries forward.
Yeah, beautifully said. So where you are you second or third year?
30 years.
Third year. Okay. You are coming on January soon. When you think about what you want to do for a career as of today, if you were to rate it out of 10, how confident are you today that you know what you're going to do with your career?
I would say a 7.
7.
And I would say 7 because I'm confident about what my intentions are for immediate next steps. And yet, life is so long that I could not possibly guarantee you 20 years down the road what my career will look like, what my days will look like. Um, but I've always held by the principle of what's the next step. So um, and maybe this is a flaw. I'm not, condoning this to everyone because I know different things work for different people. Some people find it really helpful to have a 5 year or 10 year plan, but I think I've always been someone that when I was in high school, I thought, what do I want to special, like what sciences do I want to take specifically in grade 11 and 12? Come grade 12, what university program do I want to apply to? Come first year, what was my favorite course? What specialization? Like, what do I want to keep learning next? Has sort of been my guiding question. So, so on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say 7 because I'm confident in what my next steps look like. But again, you don't want to underestimate what can happen in 15 years. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I'm like I like how you've put it because in the last couple of interviews that I've done, I've yet to hear 10 out of 10. And I know back when I was doing school and stuff, there was just this anxiety around, oh, I don't know what I want to do. I'm not 100% passionate about something. And I think in the last few conversations, including yourself, there's still like that process of figuring it out. And being 20 years removed from where you are, it's still like they're still figuring out, you're still making those decisions.
Absolutely. And then I think just one final thought, sorry, before we move on.
Yeah,
But
sure.
it's that I think it makes a difference also being in university when social media is such a prominent thing. And I'm sure that this rhetoric has been communicated multiple times on different platforms. And I'm sure your listeners have, heard it to some degree already. But when you're seeing so many examples and so many stories of tangible material success around you, then I think it creates a blueprint in your mind that that is what every single life looks like. And if every single life looks like that, then it's like this bottleneck competition of if a bottle is like this and then towards the end it becomes just like closed up and it goes up. Everyone is trying to be here and everyone's fitting to get through here and through the top. And I think one of the things that I realized was I don't know. I don't know what it takes to be up here truthfully. I'm only 20 years old. I have no idea about what it takes to be here and to get out of the bottle, but I don't think that's my goal. Because then I think about I'm very conscious, I'm very careful about how I'm going to say what I want to say, but there are so many different types of lives that are lived on this earth. And I think the only point that I'm trying to reinforce in my own mind is that there is not one single prototype that is the correct lifestyle to live. And so, whereas I think sometimes that can be perpetuated a little bit through social media, I think the only thing that I'm trying to remember is that a life lived with different material assets or a life lived with different priorities is still just as real and just as valuable. Um, and so you don't have to be 16 years old earning $2 million. You know, you can, and I think the biggest thing that's helped me is continuously being like conscious or intentional about going out into the world and reading stories of different people. Be it, you know, something like autobiographies, sure, I'm sure those are common ones, but also just like Reddit posts. And I know, you know, sometimes people question the credibility of that platform, so take it with a grain of salt. But just being on the side of the internet where you not only are exposed to the high and the mighty, which if that's what you strive for, then there's nothing more powerful than that. That's great. But also just other everyday stories, you know, that perhaps define life a little bit more than I know it probably sounds weird hearing that come out of a 20-year-old's mouth, right? Like it's it's weird.
I actually, it's refreshing, Eesha, and I'm going to be just honest with you. I think that's a little bit of the mission behind this. What we're doing here is not talking about the grandiose things. A lot of even self-help books and to social media, it's like, how do you get from zero to a billionaire overnight versus like having those conversations and insights to the people that are in the middle, if that's how you want to define it. Like, I don't even know if you'd call it in the middle
It's
because
weird.
like
Yeah,
you
you
said,
can't
there's no
quantify
right
something
way.
like that.
Yeah. But no, it's again, very, very well put. Um, okay. So I'm going to have a couple more questions for you, if you don't mind answering.
Of
If you were
course.
to identify your biggest academic weakness, what is it and how did you overcome it, or how are you overcoming it?
Chemistry. Chemistry is my biggest academic weakness. I know so many individuals who love chemistry, so I all the more respect to you. This is not me saying that everyone should find this as their weakness. Um, but that is my downfall. I can't. I will be one of those people who 20 years down the line will be giving speeches about how not doing well in your chemistry class in university is not the end of the world. Because that is very much so something that I had to experience for myself. And I don't know if there's any getting over that. I think we just accept it and you think, you know what, this is one weakness I'll keep in the bag and I'll move on with life. That's okay.
Right. What does the concept of self-leadership mean to you? And how has it shown up in your life, either through lessons learned or through your own initiative?
So this is a very well-timed question, I would say, because as an elective, I'm just taking a course called Emotionally Intelligent Leadership. And we only last week just had to submit a final reflection. And one of the questions that I thought of on my own, sort of as part of the reflection, was for all these things we've learned, all these qualities we've learned about leadership, can they be applied to leading yourself? Like, is that a thing? Can you lead yourself? And so I spoke a lot about that. But to answer your question sort of a little bit more succinctly, I 100% believe you can be led. Um, because I think it's the same. Well, let's think about what defines leadership, right? You might think empathy, you might think purpose, and you might think the ability to adapt and be flexible and respond to circumstances. Oh my gosh, there's another one quote that I'll quickly bring in here. And there's an individual called Sadhguru, and he has, and in one of his lectures or speeches, he says, or I think it was, no, it's in his book called Inner Engineering. In his book called Inner Engineering, towards the start, he says, what is responsibility? Responsibility is typically looked at or defined as obligation or a weight or a burden you're carrying on your back. But if you break down the word, it is to respond and to have an ability. So responsibility, fundamentally, if you look at it, could be interpreted as just meaning having the ability to respond. So when I think about self-leadership, to tie those two concepts together, all I think about is being intentional with your ability to respond and either on your own time cultivating it more sort of acutely. So cultivating a stronger ability to respond, be that through, therapy or emotional sort of sessions with yourself, or just learning better technical skills so you're better well equipped to lead whatever team it is in your technical expertise. So that's how I think about it is how consciously are you developing or building your ability to respond to the situation. That's it.
I love Sadhguru. I've seen quite a few of his things, just social media clips. I should do a deeper dive, but the stuff that he says is so insightful every time. It's
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay, so I think we'll leave it there, Eesha. I really want to thank you for taking the time to chat. I'm sure our listeners who are currently in your life stage or just slightly removed from it found this helpful and have an ability to relate. So thank you once again to the listeners. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.